Excellent testimony, Mr. Lindsay. All of the members, I think, have made a real contribution to the beginning of this discussion. Let me go, if I could, to a concept that was proposed by Professor Gretz at Yale. I think he's now at Columbia. He made a proposal that we go to a system that's really a hybrid, which is what most countries do. He proposed we go to a consumption tax for the vast majority of people, take 100 million people off the income tax system completely, substantially reform and reduce the corporate rate, broaden the base, and he argued that this would dramatically improve the efficiency of collection. That is, that we'd have less leakage in the system. Number two, that it would make America far more competitive. Let me just go down the line and ask if you've looked at Dr. Gretz's work and what you think of his proposal and what it would mean for both helping us reduce the deficit and at the same time improving the competitive position of the United States. Dr. Sterling.
Well, I tried to outline very briefly in my testimony. I think there are actually a variety of fixes that would be better than current law, so I would certainly say what Michael Gratz suggests is better than what we have now. The question is how far you want to go in adding on what would be essentially a VAT, a value-added tax, which is the basic tax that he would use to collect revenues for the majority of people. My principal concerns with Mr. Gratz's proposal, and I think it actually is very illuminating, is at the very bottom of the income distribution at the very top and not the middle. So he solves and simplifies a lot of things in the middle of the income distribution. At the bottom, I don't think he's really grappled with the very tough issue of how you integrate things like earned income credits and child credits. We could have a separate testimony on this with food stamps and TANF and now health subsidies that phase out when your income goes up. So we have all these indirect tax systems at the bottom that are based on income, and I don't believe that he actually has solved the problem at the bottom. And at the top, he leaves in place all of these deductions and credits for high-income people. So the notion of high-income people getting a home mortgage interest deduction and low-income people not getting any subsidy for the housing seems to me doesn't quite work either. But if you ask for the base, the core of the proposal, would you consider replacing a significant portion of the current income tax with a value-added tax? I think a lot of economists would say, might not agree that that's the reform they would favor. Mr. Lindsay indicated another way he would go about it, but I think they would say it's better than the current law.
And how do you, if you were to move in that direction, how do you protect the most vulnerable among us? How do you protect those who are at the lowest end of the income scale?
Well, this is a subject that has not gotten much attention lately, but as I say, we now have low and moderate income taxpayers in so many phase-outs of so many programs that their marginal tax rates are among the highest in the nation. Some of them face 70 or 80% rates, 40, 50% rates are very common. You lose your food stamps, you lose your, in the new health law, there's a 10 cents or more phase out of your health benefit, you lose your earned income credit, you lose your child credit. All these phase-outs basically start adding up, and then you add on the Social Security and the income tax rate. I think we have to actually think about reform of what we want to do at the bottom of the income distribution, in the middle of the income distribution, the top of the income distribution, almost think about them separately. So we take the progressivity issue on the side, we decide how much we're going to collect or how much we're going to give to these groups, and then we try to simplify for each group. I think that requires a reform effort that even goes beyond what we're discussing today.
Dr. Marin?
Thanks. I guess my approach is to say that there are several things we're trying to accomplish in a tax system, right? One is to raise as much revenue, the revenue we need to pay for the government without harming the economy, and the best way to do that is to go towards a consumption tax. One of the other things we would like to do is achieve certain progressivity goals, right? Tax system is a very important way that we think about the distribution of after-tax income in the United States, and frankly, income taxes tend to be a better lever for doing that. And what the Gratz proposal is trying to do is, in essence, find a compromise sweet spot in there that is recognizing that for the economy as a whole, it's better to have more of the tax base be consumption-based. That's why he introduces a VAT. But then recognizing that if you want what I think is widely held as kind of a fair conception of what the distribution of the tax burden ought to be, that you're going to need something like an income tax at the higher level to collect that. And he's trying to strike that balance. My sense is that he succeeds in the sense of creating a tax system that would make strengthen the economy, be beneficial for competitiveness. As Gene says, there are a lot of difficult details about how you actually implement that and accomplish all the goals throughout the income distribution. But as a basic structure, I think it's an interesting one to think about.
Dr. Altshuler?
Yes, I agree with Donald. I'm a fan, and I very much believe that all roads lead to a VAT. I just think that that's where we're going to have to end up. Adding a VAT onto the system would allow for lower rates, so you get all the benefits of the lower rates. You'd have a system that's much less complicated, I believe. You'd have much less of incentives for income shifting. It's implementable. We can do this. Canada, all other countries in the OECD have a VAT. This is how they raise their revenue. Virtually every other country in the world has a VAT. So it is something that could be done.
But how do you protect those who are at the lowest end of the income distribution? Those who are the most vulnerable among us. How do you protect them in that system?
That is the difficulty, and that's what Gene and Donald have also talked about. Now remember that you're going to be retaining the income tax, so you can run refunds and transfer programs through the income tax. So by retaining the income tax,
you could keep the earned income tax credit. You can keep the child care credit.
Exactly. So you can help out the distributional consequences of moving to a VAT through the income tax system. I believe the Tax Policy Center is studying this right now, and as Gene said, with more study into this, I do think that we could get the distributional consequences to be something that we desire. And I think what we need to remember is that we are keeping the mechanism of the income tax, so that's going to help us out at the bottom of the income distribution.
Dr. Lindsay.
Well, first of all, I think we all agree that almost anything would be better than what we have, and that would be what I would think about Mr. Kretz's comment. I also agree that, as I said in my testimony, I think we have to move toward a business receipts tax or a VAT. I would reject retaining the income tax along with it because I don't see we're adding yet another definition of income or another calculation everyone has to do as a net gain. I think within the context of a business receipts tax, you can have substantial progressivity. For example, you could have a base business receipts tax rate, call it 20%.
Explain that. For those listening and for the members of the committee, what do you mean by that? How does that work?
Well, a business receipts tax or a VAT are very similar concepts. Essentially, the base would be total receipts by the company minus what was paid and taxed to a different company. So, for example, if I'm making a car and I buy steel, I send the steel company a check to buy the steel, and the value-added tax on that steel is part of that. So to avoid double taxing, if I can show that I have, basically it's called an invoice. If I have an invoice that says you paid tax on that once, you don't have to pay tax on it a second time. So the base would be all the money coming in minus the cash going out that you paid a tax on. Now, if I bought that from steel from China, I didn't pay a VAT on it or a business receipts tax, no deduction, and so we'd be leveling the playing field between purchases of goods here and purchases of goods from overseas.
So that would help the competitive position of the United States
right.
vis-a-vis taxes with respect to one of our toughest competitors and all of our competitors who have a similar system.
Absolutely. And if you think of it as that's the central issue, and I think that it really is our central economic issue, you have to say, why wouldn't I want to throw as much as, if I'm going to move to that system anyway, why wouldn't I want to move as much of our tax base into that system as possible? If I know I'm going to gain competitiveness by doing it, why would I only want to gain competitiveness on half my tax system why wouldn't I want to gain competitiveness on all of my tax system? And that's why I would move to the one tax. Now,
But this what goes to, it takes us right back to this fundamental question. If you do it all on that side of the ledger, how do you maintain progressivity in the system so that those, especially those who are the least vulnerable, who benefit from the current tax system through the Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Care Tax Credit, how do you maintain that support for that end of the spectrum?
Sure. Let me mention the high end as well. There's
Correct.
no reason why, again, you got the business filling out its tax form. They do the calculation on the base I just said. Then you have a second line that says, subtract the first $10,000 a month you pay to every employee. In other words, in wages up to $10,000. You get another line, you put another tax on top of that. So that high-end wages and profits, including interest and dividends, would be subject to the higher rate. I think that's how you get progressivity on the higher end. On the lower end, this is not a hard problem. I mean, there's no reason why you can't have wage subsidies built in to an EIC, an EITC sort of. Right now, we incorporate the EIC right into the payroll checks of most companies. You can get, I think it's called prepaid, there's a way, we have it in the tax system where you don't have to wait for April 15th to get your earned income tax credit now. You can get it in every paycheck you file. There's no reason why you can't do that in the VAT system either. The other aspect of the help for people on the lower end of the income distribution, it's been pointed out that right now we've got among the most complicated set of rules because we have different rules for food stamps, for health care, for what have you. So that is something that you can reform separately. You can run it through the tax system. You can run it through a direct payment system, which is what a lot of what we do now is. When you think about, quote, welfare in the old days, it had nothing to do with the tax system. It was a direct payment to people based on their income and based on their number of children they had. So I don't see where there is an obstacle toward providing progressivity in our combined tax transfer system by moving to a value-added tax or a business receipts tax.
All right.